to wish you Happy New Year. Per the usual, if you can advance the next screen, Linnell, we are going to ask you to stay muted during the presentation. We're very excited to have Adam with us today from the University of North Florida. You can raise your hand or use the chat feature to ask a question or to make a comment. And at the end of his presentation, hopefully Adam will be able to see the comments in the chat and the questions, and we'll respond to those. And if not, Linnell will facilitate feeding those to him. We never know how Zoom's going to behave on a particular day. And so with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our league chapter president, Linnell Philman, to introduce our speaker and to make some announcements.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking time out of a not so cloudy day to join us to learn more about heat mapping. So our guest today is Dr. Adam Rosenblatt, who grew up in Philadelphia, went to college in Ohio, got his PhD in Miami, and did his postdoctorate in Connecticut. And he's already worked for the U.S. Department of Energy. Currently, he serves as professor of biology at University of North Florida. He's done ecology research all over the world on an eclectic array of species: tree swallows in Ohio, sharks, turtles, and stingrays in Australia, manatees in Belize, humpback whales in Hawaii, dolphins in New Zealand, sharks and alligators here in Florida, and the black caiman in Guyana, and also spiders and grasshoppers in Connecticut. His main research interests are investigating the roles that large predators play in determining the structure and function of ecosystems, and investigating the potential effects of climate change and land use change on ecosystem and food web dynamics. He's currently developing a research program at the University of North Florida with a focus on alligators, sea turtles, and grasshoppers. Today, however, he's going to be speaking to us about heat mapping research in Jacksonville, which was actually part of the NOAA study of many cities nationwide. So we're going to hear how that data was collected, what it tells us, and how it can be used for improvement. And so with that, Professor Rosenblatt, I will welcome you to the League of Women Voters, Jacksonville First Coast, and the Zoom floor is yours.
Thanks so much for that very kind introduction. I won't be talking today at all about any of my ecology research. Happy to talk about that to anybody at a later time if you wish. Today I'm going to be talking about some work that we've been doing in my lab in collaboration with the city that's more directly related to the health of people and the health of the environment around us and how we're going to be affected by that. So I'm going to share my screen here and we can get into it. Okay, there we go. Can everybody see that okay? Is that all right? Yes, wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you today about urban heat, which is already a problem in Jacksonville, and it's going to be a larger problem in the future. And so we need to get a handle on what's going on, why we have a heat problem, and what we can do about it, and then how potentially you all at the League of Women Voters can work on lessening the risk from extreme heat. So first, why should we be worrying about heat? In Jacksonville, for the most part, when we talk about the climate crisis, we usually talk about hurricanes, we usually talk about sea level rise and flooding. And these are all things that we should be concerned about, but I would argue that we have not spent enough time thinking about heat. And the reason we need to be concerned about it is because heat kills more people than any other weather event in the United States and across the entire planet. It's mostly a silent killer, so it doesn't get as much attention as deaths caused by hurricanes or tornadoes, things of that nature. But it is the #1 killer of people when it comes to weather events. Just for example, in 2019 here in Florida, there were more than 6,800 heat-related ER visits across the state, and that number is probably going to rise over the coming years as heat becomes an even bigger threat in our state. Beyond the impacts on human health, we need to be concerned about heat because it affects infrastructure, right? All of the infrastructure of the cities we live in is impacted by heat. Roadways can buckle because of extreme heat. Railways can be misshapen because of extreme heat. Runways at airports can be affected by extreme heat. Bridges, right? We have so many bridges here in Jacksonville, and the integrity, the structural integrity of bridges can be negatively impacted by extreme heat. So beyond just the public health threat, it's also a threat to the infrastructure that we all rely on to live our lives. And we need to be concerned about it specifically here in Jacksonville for two reasons. One is something called the urban heat island effect. This is not unique to Jacksonville. This occurs in every city around the globe. But just to give you a little intro into what it is, basically cities tend to have much higher heat risk than rural areas because of the way that cities are built. Cities have a lot of asphalt, they have a lot of buildings, and those kinds of materials will absorb heat very readily and then re-emit it out into the environment and heat up the air around, asphalt and buildings. And that is not what happens in rural areas that have less asphalt and fewer buildings. Also, because we pave over the ground and we pave over wetlands, we limit the amount of water that can penetrate into the ground and the amount of water that can then evaporate back into the air during a heat wave. And that if that water was able to evaporate into the air, it would help, cool things down over time. So for these reasons and some others that I'm not going to go into the detail of, cities tend to be much hotter than rural areas. And so that's why Jacksonville in particular is at threat from extreme heat. The other reason is the climate crisis that I alluded to before. Heat extremes are going to get more extreme in the future. They already are extreme, they're getting worse. This is data from the Union of Concerned Scientists and from their academic partners. And this is the number of days per year where the heat index is above 105 degrees Fahrenheit. You can see historically between 1971 and 2000, Jacksonville experienced about 3 days per year where the heat index went above 105. You can see as the climate crisis continues, we are projected to see 46 days per year by the middle of this century and up to 91 days per year by the end of this century where the heat index is above 105. So that means by 2100, we're looking at basically 3 straight months where every single day is above 105 degrees Fahrenheit heat index. That's June, July, and August, right? These are going to be summer days where it's already hot and it's going to become much hotter. And that is a huge problem for us because above 105 degrees, that's when the human body's ability to cool itself through, sweat. That's when that ability starts to break down because there's so much humidity in the air and the heat index is so high that our body just can't cool itself anymore. And that's when you get heat stroke. That's when you get people having to go to the hospital because of heat related stress, right? And this obviously is a huge public health nightmare waiting to happen. And that, again, this is specific for Duval County, right? These are our numbers just for right here. So we know we're gonna have more heat to deal with in the future. The other thing to keep in mind when talking about extreme heat is that not all communities are exposed to the same amount of risk. This is data from the Orlando Sentinel showing how heat-related illness rates are related to the median income of a community. This is for, I think, maybe 200 different cities in, both large and small cities in Florida. And you can see that there's a general trend where areas that have very high median incomes, they tend to have lower rates of heat-related illness, and areas with lower income tend to have higher rates of heat-related illness. And the reasons are obvious, right? People who have high incomes, they can tend to afford air conditioning, reliable air conditioning, and they tend to live in neighborhoods that have less asphalt and more trees, right? So there's less of a heat risk. Whereas the opposite is true in lower income communities. There's usually fewer trees, there's less tree coverage, there's less green space, there's less access to reliable air conditioning. And so that leads to a higher rate of heat-related illness. So more people from lower income communities are expected to be, going to the ER because of heat stress than people from high income communities. So that's what led to my desire to do the Jacksonville heat mapping project. The goal of this project was to determine which neighborhoods in Jacksonville are hotter than others, to educate the public about heat risks, which is what we're doing right now, and to provide data for the community, the chief resilience officer, and city council to act on. The data that I'm going to show you today has already been provided to the city's chief resilience officer, whose job is to come up with a climate resilience strategy for the city. And that strategy is going to be released sometime early in 2023. Very excited to see what that looks like. But she and I worked together on this project to make it happen. She is responsible for part of the funding for this project. And so she's using the heat data we collected to help develop a plan for how the city can, limit heat risk both now and in the future as part of the climate resilience strategy. And I was the leader of this project. I had the idea for this project, but I obviously did not do it alone. We had a lot of community partners who worked with us. My University of North Florida, provided support. As I said, the city of Jacksonville provided a good portion of the funding for the project, as well as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida, the St. John's Riverkeeper, the Jacksonville Office of the National Weather Service, and a company called Kappa Strategies, which runs a program called Heat Watch. All of these folks together helped us pull off this massive project. So this is what we did. In the summer of 2022, we divided the city into 30 different zones that you can see here on this map. And each of the zones was assigned to a pair of volunteers. And those volunteers would drive their cars on a specific day at specific times through their zone on a specific route, and they would collect heat and humidity data. This is what this looks like. These are two of our volunteers, Dimitri and Valerie, and that's their car behind them. And you can see that white thing that's attached to the passenger side window. That white thing is a heat and humidity and wind sensor. And so they would drive around at less than 35 miles per hour, and that sensor would record data once per second, right? So we're collecting very high resolution heat and humidity and wind data. And with those data, we can calculate heat index at a very fine local scale. And then we can compare it, between different neighborhoods. So this is what the actual raw data looks like. This was on June 18th is when we did this. It just so happened that June 18th happened to be one of the hottest days of the year, which was good for us because we were trying to capture sort of what are the extremes that we experience here in Jacksonville. And we chose the state in collaboration with our partners at the National Weather Service because we needed to, didn't have a high chance of rain. So this is what the raw data looks like that the volunteers collected. And then we used a machine learning algorithm, which I won't go into the details of how that all works, but basically you can use a machine learning algorithm to take raw data and help fill in the gaps to create a complete map, right? Instead of just this sort of zone by zone map that I'm showing you right now. So this is what that complete map looks like. This is the raw temperature for June 18th. This is in the evening. This is between 7 and 8 p.m. is when this data was collected. And you can see in the upper left the range of temperatures that were experienced during that hour. So there was a low of about 88 degrees. Those are the blue zones. And then the dark red zones are close to 98 degrees. So what this shows us already is that, at the exact same time across the city, there can be as much as a 10-degree Fahrenheit difference in temperature across different neighborhoods. And you can see where those neighborhoods are, right? The hottest neighborhoods are the downtown core, right? Downtown Jacksonville, San Marco, certain parts of Arlington, larger sections of the north side beyond just the urban core, and even out towards the beaches. Actually, it got surprisingly hot. We weren't expecting to see as much heat around the beaches. And what you can conclude from this, if I show you this other map, on the right-hand side is a map of land use types around Jacksonville. Which areas are zoned for residential, which areas are zoned for commercial, industrial, agriculture, all these different zones. What you can see just by looking at these two maps side by side is that most of the hottest areas of the city are concentrated around areas that are zoned for commercial and industrial purposes, which makes sense because those are the areas that tend to have the highest amount of asphalt, right? So those are the areas that are absorbing a lot of heat and then re-emitting it back out into the environment. And that's why the downtown is so hot. And that's why there are a lot of hotspots right along US 1 and I-95 and also along Atlantic Boulevard and Beach Boulevard heading out towards the beaches. So that's sort of the brief explanation of what we're seeing here. But I want to show you some specific examples of how this works. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to share a different one of my screens. This is a web application that you all can access whenever you want. Can you all see this map that I'm showing you? Yeah, good. So you can, I'm going to give you the link at the end of this talk so you can access this data. This is publicly available data. You can do whatever you want with it. You can zoom in and out. But I just want to sort of give you a little guided tour towards what this looks like. So if we zoom in here, I'm going to zoom in on UNF, which is where I work. So this is UNF here. And you can see that there's, some blue. You can see there's a little bit of orange here. There's a lot of area that isn't filled in. That's because the machine learning algorithm isn't able to complete the modeling, process over wetlands. And these are all wetlands here. So that's why you're not seeing colors across all of the UNF campus. You can see that close to the wooded areas of the UNF campus, there is, it's low heat risk. It isn't that hot in that area. Contrast that with the St. John's Town Center just to the west, right? And St. John's Town Center is bright red. because, I'm sure many of you have been to St. John's Town Center. It is solid wall-to-wall asphalt and buildings. If we zoom in, we can actually see it. I mean, you look at that and there's just almost no tree coverage, very little green space in St. John's Town Center. And so it absorbs a lot of heat and it creates a huge heat problem. Whereas, if we zoom back out, again, we can see, how all of the wooded areas closer to UNF have that bluer color. So we see that repeated throughout Jacksonville. If you go up to the north here to the Regency Mall in Arlington, you can see the exact same dynamic. It's very, very dark red right around the Regency Square Mall. And if we zoom in, it's because, again, solid asphalt everywhere, very little green space. And then to show you what this looks like in residential areas, if we go further to the north towards the Fort Caroline National Memorial, you can see there is this blue hole in the middle of this residential area. There's orange and red around in most of this residential area, but then there's this blue area right in the center. And so you're wondering, okay, well, why is that area blue? What's different about that area? And if you zoom in on it, you can see the difference. You can see that this area has a lot more trees than the surrounding area just to the north. You can see the tree coverage really declines as we get towards the river next to Fort Caroline National Memorial. So you can see how planning of different urban spaces affects the heat risk for different communities, right? That's kind of the message that I'm trying to get across here. And again, this data is publicly available. I'll share with you the link at the end of this talk, and you can write it down and you can go check it out for yourself. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. There we go. Let's get back to where we were. We were right here. Okay, so this is what we just looked at. And then let's go to the next slide here. Okay, this is just another map highlighting what I was talking about before, where it's, there's a problem with low income communities being exposed to more heat risk. So on the right here, this is the percent of underserved population by census block group across Duval County. Basically what this means is what percentage of each census block is under the poverty line. And the darker areas of the city have higher proportions of people who live below the poverty line. And so you can see it's not a one-to-one correlation. I'm not saying that every single area that is a low-income community in Jacksonville is exposed to extreme heat, but you can see that there are certain areas where you have both extreme heat risk and low-income communities living there, again, mostly on the north side and in Arlington. So those are the communities that are going to be most exposed to heat stress, and they're the communities that are least well equipped to deal with the heat stress in a safe way, right? The next thing I want to leave you with here is another heat map. So on the left is the heat map we've been talking about this whole time, which is the raw temperature. But on the right, we have the heat index, which is what we actually feel on our skin, right? That's the real feel temperature that you see on weather reports. And you can see that that is even more extreme than the raw temperature data. So remember, for the raw temperature data, there was about a 10-degree difference in temperature across the city, depending on which neighborhood you're in. But in the heat index map, you can see there's more than a 20-degree difference across the city. The low temperature is around 95 degrees when it comes to heat index, and the high temperature is almost 117 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Which is extremely hot and uncomfortable and dangerous to people's health. And you can see a lot of the same areas that were exposed to extreme raw temperatures are also exposed to extreme heat index temperatures. Again, the downtown urban core and the north side are really at risk here, more so than other communities. Okay, so to summarize what we've been talking about here, Jacksonville is going to get much hotter as the climate crisis continues, I'm sorry to report. Extreme heat risk is not equally distributed across the cities. There are certain, high income, wealthier communities that are not going to be as prone to heat stress, whereas there are lower income communities that are going to be more exposed to heat stress. And industrial and commercial areas are particularly incredibly hot in Jacksonville, which again, that's not a surprise. That's what we were expecting to find. That is a general trend you see across cities all across the globe. But there are solutions, of course, right? There are solutions at our disposal. We just need to put them into practice. And that's, again, why I wanted to share this data with the Chief Resilience Officer and the City Council, because the hope is that, the mayor and the City Council, whoever the mayor is in 2023, and the City Council will act on this data and try to reduce the amount of heat stress that we are feeling currently and in the future in Jacksonville. So the solutions for mitigating urban heat, some of which you're probably familiar with already, Things like urban greening. This is sort of a catch-all term for planting more trees, expanding green spaces. It's installing rain gardens and green roofs, right? These are things that the city can put money towards to try to reduce heat risk. Getting rid of excess asphalt, right? We have a lot of abandoned lots in Jacksonville that are, we have a ton of parking lots that don't get used that much. So getting rid of that excess asphalt would be great, converting it into green space, or at least using reflective paint on it if it's going to remain asphalt, because the reflective paint will help reflect more of the sun's energy back out into space instead of it being absorbed by the asphalt. Revising zoning laws to require more green space in developments. So, again, a place like St. John's Town Center, I'm not familiar with all the zoning laws for Jacksonville, but I assume that there's no law that says, if you're going to develop a huge commercial property, there has to be a certain amount of green space included in that property. It would be great to see those zoning laws revised so that it said, 30% of the area has to be, either has to have tree coverage or has to at least be a lawn, right? Because even that's an improvement over asphalt. And then lastly, this is a big one, but expanding public transportation would be really great for helping to get rid of some of those parking lots and converting them into green space to try to lower heat risk across the city. Just to give you an example of the effect of some of these practices on heat, I'm going to show you a series of pictures that I took with a thermal camera on the day of this study on June 18th of last summer. So this is a picture with this thermal camera of the parking lot right outside of the Jaguars stadium. And you can, there's no shade, right? There's absolutely no tree coverage in that parking lot. And you can see the maximum temperature of the surface of this parking lot was 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very, very hot. If we move down the street to Riverside Park, you can see this is an unshaded lawn, right? So again, there's no shade, but at least it's a lawn instead of asphalt. You can see that the temperature decreases to 98 degrees Fahrenheit. And then if you go across the street from the Jaguar Stadium to the WJCT NPR parking lot, you can see they do have some shade there. And there, what I recorded with this camera was a high temperature of 106 degrees Fahrenheit in the unshaded portion, but then that drops to 81 degrees Fahrenheit in the shaded portion, right, where there are trees nearby. So you can see the major impact that trees can have. They can lower the temperature by as much as 25 degrees Fahrenheit, which is massive, right? I mean, that can save lives in an extreme heat event. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to push the city to really expand. The other thing to keep in mind, of course, is that we want to be doing all these things. We want to be adapting to climate change. We want to be having a resilience strategy so we can deal with the negative effects of the climate crisis. But we can't lose sight of the fact that we need to be dealing with the cause of the climate crisis, right? And that means reducing fossil fuel use across all sectors of society. By no means am I proposing that we, focus all of our energy on just trying to mitigate heat risk. What we should be doing as well at the same time is trying to reduce fossil fuel use. And that requires, lobbying, and it requires advocacy, which I know, of course, the League of Women Voters is very good at. So now I'm going to take off my University of North Florida academic hat and talk to you about Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a local organization that's part of a national organization that I run here in Jacksonville, where we advocate at the federal level for common sense climate change legislation. And so, that's kind of what I do in my own life to try to, advance these policies of reducing fossil fuel use. And what I'm hoping is that maybe we could have a conversation between Citizens Climate Lobby and between the League of Women Voters about maybe trying to coordinate some of our advocacy work when it comes to climate change. I know League of Women Voters, advocates for lots of different policies at the state and federal level, some of which have nothing to do with climate change. But I was on the League of Women Voters website just yesterday and saw that there is an environment and natural resources, part of your legislative plan for 2023, right? And one of those, bullet points here for this plan is supporting resiliency and adaptation to integrative climate change and sea level rise, and supporting expanded solar and electric vehicle networks of charging stations. These are things that Citizens Climate Lobby is also, in favor of, obviously. So I'm wondering if at the end of this talk, we could maybe have a brief conversation about whether that's a possibility, if we could partner in some way through our advocacy efforts to try to increase, our voice in Congress. What we do at Citizens Climate Lobby is we don't talk a lot to the local and state officials. We talk mostly to the federal officials. So we talk to Representative Rutherford And we'll talk to Representative Bean as well, who now, represents Nassau County. So we will be continuing that in 2023. We bring up specific pieces of legislation that are related to climate change, and we say, hey, this is why we want you to support this. And sometimes they do support it, and sometimes they don't support it. And we also talk to, of course, Senators Scott and Rubio about the same legislation, but in the Senate. And we try to get everybody on board to support this, at least from the Florida congressional delegation. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'd love to have that conversation with you all about whether we could sort of coordinate about that. Here's my contact information if anybody wants to get in touch with me. And then at the bottom there, you can see the link for the heat maps. It's bit.ly/Jack's heat map is where you can find the data that I was showing you today if you want to explore it for yourself. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Oh, Professor, that was a lot. First off, you scared me a little because that is a lot. That's a lot of heat in a lot of places, and it's impacting our community and our state in a lot of ways. I wanted to ask, when you talk about working with the Chief Resilience Officer, so we have like all these entities here in Jacksonville. We have the Downtown Investment Authority, we have the Transit Authority, we have housing developers. We're told about 1,000 people a day move to Florida, so we know that they have to live somewhere. We also know that people create human waste, and that has to be processed. At the same time, we're fighting for green spaces. Businesses are moving here to take advantage of the number of people that are moving here in need of services. And at the same time, we have this impact on our healthcare and our healthcare industry. Do you know, is there any concerted effort for conversation or collaboration across these different disciplines or entities where they're taking all of this into consideration about how we grow here in Jacksonville?
Yes, that's a great question. That is exactly the role of the Chief Resilience Officer. She was hired, if you're not familiar with her, her name is Ann Calamese. She worked in the Obama White House, and then she worked in New Orleans on their climate, resiliency planning. And she was hired by Mayor Curry, and she started here at the very end of the summer of 2021. And her main job is, she's fantastic. I've worked with her, obviously on this project. And her main job is to coordinate all of the individuals across the entire city government to be pulling in the same direction, right? So as you said, she's working with people from JEA, from the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, from Urban Planning Office, from all the different groups. Her job is to coordinate, make sure that everybody's working on the same things and pulling in the same direction, as I said. So she's the one, and she's very, open to conversation with community members. She's had, I don't know if she's had she hasn't given like a town hall or anything, but there's a number. I can give you all her email address, and you can just email her and see if you want to get in touch with her and see if you can, have a conversation with her.
We hosted her when she first came to town. A number of organizations hosted her. We had a great opportunity to hear from her. And we will probably revisit another speaking opportunity with her in the future, but you are right. And I did want to follow up and say that I would like to find time for us to talk offline from this to include our Natural Resources Director, Angela DeMondron, about the Citizens Climate Venture, an opportunity to talk to you about some opportunities there.
Fantastic. I would love to do that. Yeah, we don't have to talk about it today, obviously.
Okay.
But yeah, I would love to continue to have that conversation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here because and I think Lori had her hand raised.
Well, I've got one in the chat first, Lori, if you don't mind, real quick. Sandy, you may have to unmute yourself. You had a question here about the temperature map and the heat index map as it pertains to San Marco. You said San Marco in red on the temperature map, but on blue on the heat index. Can you explain that, Sandy?
Yeah, here, let me.
I'm hoping Adam can explain that because, that's a big difference, and I don't know how it.
Yeah, no, that is a big difference. You're right. Here, let me bring that back up so you can see what we're talking about here. So we're talking about the difference between, let's see if we can get this to go backwards. Okay. These maps here. Yeah. So San Marco is on the very high end in the raw temperature map right here, right? And then you can see it gets bluer and yellower on the heat index map. So the heat index, it works in some complicated ways. And I'm not claiming that I am an expert on the heat indexes. I am not. That's not my area of expertise. But my understanding is that, you know, there's influence of lots of factors on heat index, obviously temperature, humidity, and wind speed. So it's possible that San Marco, for whatever reason, has a lower humidity level than surrounding areas, or it maybe has higher wind speed than surrounding areas. And that's what's sort of lowering that heat index value relative to the rest of the city. You can see other strange things. Like if you look in Mandarin, where I live, right along the coast of Mandarin, if you look at the raw temperature, it's pretty cool. But if you look at the heat index, it's extremely hot, right? It's one of the hottest areas of the city when looking at the heat index. This also has to do with the St. Johns River, right? The St. Johns River stores a lot of heat because it's a water body, and water is better at storing heat than the air. So, and again, I'm not saying this is definitely what's causing this, but it's possible that for some reason there's hot water that is, you know, aggregating around Mandarin for some reason, whereas hot water in the river is not aggregating around San Marco, right? So it's, I don't have a, you know, an exact explanation for why this occurs. All I can do is show you the data and say that there are differences here. But what's key to remember, right, is that even though San Marco is on the cooler side of the heat index map, if you look at what that cooler means, it still means 95 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Which is not cool by any means. So just keep that in mind when thinking about these maps.
Oh, okay. Well, and
Thank you
all
for
of
that,
south
Steve.
side is blue. So
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I said all of south side is blue. I said San Marco, but I didn't realize that San Marco was that little tip. But
Yeah, no, you're right. More of
Behind
the
it.
south side right here is blue as well on the heat index map. And again, I don't know exactly why that is. We'd have to talk to a meteorologist or an atmospheric scientist to get a better insight into why there's such a big difference here. All I can say is that there is a difference. For some reason, the south side doesn't have as high humidity as you know, the north side.
Thank you for that, Sandy. Laura, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lori Ann Santamaria. Thank you, Adam. I've been looking forward to this presentation for a bit. I've heard a lot about this in the community, and just to have a chance to hear it in more detail has been great. And also, thanks to the League of Women Voters. This is actually my first meeting with you guys, and I just joined recently online, so I'm looking forward to getting to know some of you. My question actually has to do with one of the questions that came up after the presentation, which was regarding like growth and kind of a concerted effort to manage the growth. So I most recently I was in St. John's. I just moved further north towards Jacksonville. I'm really just starting to get involved in the community here. And my question has to do with I guess who is there a group? I know there's the Jax Climate Coalition that's working from a climate perspective to reduce the fossil fuel use that we have within the community. My question is from an economic perspective. Who in Jacksonville what is the coordinated group that's looking at economic development that's not, you know, not necessarily government, like that's bringing in the private sector? Who's responsible for that? Because I think I'm starting to understand the environmental side, and then I need to understand a little bit more the business side, and then I'm wondering where the intersection is. So maybe anybody on the call can help to enlighten me on that. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a great question. There are other people on the call who might have more insight than I do on this. As somebody mentioned earlier, you know, there's the Downtown Investment Authority. They're in charge of the downtown area and sort of the development in that specific part of the city when it comes to, you know, population and what's happening there. And then across the entire city, there's an urban planning office. But I don't know if there is does the city have, what I think you're asking is, does the city have some kind of growth plan for how to deal with all the people who are moving to this area? You know, we are one of the fastest growing parts of the state in Northeast Florida, especially St. Johns County. I assume that there is some kind of growth plan that the city has, but I don't know who is in charge of it or how it gets executed. Does anybody else know? No, I guess not. So yeah, that's something that we should be looking into, because that office obviously needs to be a big, I mean, so the chief resilience officer, she would know that for certain, right? That would be the person that I would reach out to try to understand more about that information, because, if we're going to be trying to decrease the amount of heat risk and, manage all the climate risks that the city faces, a big part of that is making sure that development is being done responsibly, right? We need to not be developing in coastal areas. We need to be developing more inland, and we need to be developing, again, in more sort of a green space oriented mindset rather than just, building these large, these huge housing subdivisions that have, 5,000 houses but don't have any trees, right? I mean, that's a major issue.
Yeah, and how do we do it in a way that's cooperative? Because I think certainly like from a planning perspective, zoning and regulation is one way to do it, but I think can probably get more support if we look at it from a cooperative perspective. How do we meet the growth goals that we have in a way that's also sustainable?
Yeah, for sure. And you're 100% right. That needs to be a major part of this whole conversation.
Thank you, Lori. Professor, there's a question. Would you happen to know what type of trees help cool the air better?
Yes, great question. So we have a problem where we are addicted to palm trees, right? People, for some reason, love palm trees. I guess because they kind of look, exotic and they look tropical, right? And so there are lots of houses and there are lots of housing developments where sort of palm trees are prioritized as the tree, and also, along roadways, right? Like I live again in Mandarin, and where 295 crosses through Mandarin, there has been this planting going on that I've been looking at on the side of 295 as it leads towards the Buckman Bridge, and they're planting only palm trees, right? And palm trees are not useful for much of anything, to be honest with you. They don't provide a lot of shade. They don't suck up a lot of water, so they can't really help with flooding issues. So palm trees are not the solution, right? We need to be prioritizing species like oaks, right? Oaks have massive canopies. They suck up a ton of water. So, there's so many what they call co-benefits to these kinds of trees, right? If you have a big oak tree, it is providing shade, right? It is helping to control flooding issues by sucking up a lot of water during rainstorms. It is helping to filter the air, right, through photosynthesis. I mean, there's all of these ways that trees are beneficial, but you need to plant the right trees in the right places, right? So one thing that we should be doing as a city is we should be not cutting down, old growth oak trees and, maple trees, things like that. And we should be trying to plant more of those kinds of trees. It takes a while for them to grow up into big canopy trees, right? I mean, oak trees are very long lived. You're not just going to be able to plant a mature, oak tree. You can't pick it up from one place and transplant it to another. It's a very difficult thing to do. So you have to plant smaller oak trees and then wait a couple decades, right? But the point is we need to start right now because, otherwise we're going to have major heat problems without a big increase in tree coverage to help mitigate those heat problems.
Thank you for that. Emily, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So Mayor Curry is term limited. Is there a sense that the potential candidates for mayors, and I know there's a lot right now, that they will support continually having the chief resiliency officer?
Yes, great question. So luckily, when the chief resiliency officer was hired, the budget for her salary and her office was codified into the the city, whatever it's called. It's like the city budget. So that means that the mayor cannot just fire whoever the new mayor is, cannot just fire the chief resilience officer because it's actually under the purview of the city council now, right? Because it's part of the city's budget. So that's a good thing. The thing about the candidates that I know of, the major candidates are Donna Deegan for the Democrats and, Daniel Davis is probably the front runner for the Republicans. I don't know much about Daniel Davis's stance on climate related issues. I do know a lot about Donna Deegan's stance because I've actually worked with her. I worked with her when she was running for Congress. She was running against Representative Rutherford, and she is very, pro-environment, very bullish on climate change, trying to solve the problem, right? So, we know Donna Deegan is in the right frame of mind. I can't say anything about Daniel Davis and his climate change stance because I haven't read anything about it. So that's all I know.
Has the Chamber of Commerce, have they made any statements about resiliency or the impact of heat or climate at all?
I would doubt that they've said anything specific about heat. They probably have said something about climate change at some point, but I don't know specifically. I've never seen that or read about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Carrie, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Do you have any information about Representative Joe Geller's change in the zoning so that we can take those parking lots off of the state highways and convert that into, multiple housing opportunities?
Yeah, no, I do not have any information about, he's a state representative.
Yes, and I saw that as a win-win because then we're not cutting down those old growth trees. We're getting rid of the asphalt by, we desperately need affordable housing as well. So I just see that as a win-win that we all need to learn more about. So Geller,
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you.
Geller.
I need to learn more about zoning laws myself. I mean, so this is, the problem is, right, this is not sexy work, right? Like, learning about zoning laws is nobody's idea probably of a good time. But, this is the like nuts and bolts part of policy that we as advocates for this kind of change, we need to be more versed in it. And I'm not claiming that I've done my work, right? I need to do my work to understand more about zoning laws. But that's really where I think a lot of the progress is going to be made.
Right, going to those council meetings, the city council meetings. I mean, it's like one sentence. I looked all over for it. I couldn't find it anywhere. So thank you for confirming. This is like boring me to death, but that's what we have to do, right?
Yeah, but if we can get state level and city and county level changes in zoning laws, that would be, in my opinion, that would be the biggest impact we could have on all of this, heat stress issue, because that's a top-down, legal change that's going to mandate that people pay attention to these things in the future.
It's kind of interesting. One of the first things that we do when we do development, whether it's housing development, business development, is we come in with those big bulldozers and we remove all the trees. And then they build houses and they plant small trees. And sometimes they're not the type of trees. There are a number of palm trees in my neighborhood there in Mandarin as well, Professor, but along the roadways. So it just seems like if we could get all of these entities who have the ability to impact us to talk to each other and find a way to still be pro-business, pro-housing development, but to do it in such a way to where we don't do such harm to the environment or to the people that we're bringing here. It seems like, the cost of healthcare is not getting less expensive in the nation, especially here in the state of Florida. And to hear how many ER visits are the result of heat stress or some sort of heat impact, that is huge. And we know that this impacts our lower income communities than it does our more well-to-do communities. So this is a long-term issue that we really do need people to commit to.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, are there any other questions for the professor before we turn him loose for the rest of his day? Carrie has another one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really strongly passionate about health disparities and how Black women and their babies die 4 times more than white. Not even looking at income or anything. And I think extreme heat as the silent killer is a major reason for that. And so I just wanted to lift you and your work up and just applaud you and say thank you so much. Especially
thank you. I appreciate that. I agree. It's amazing. I mean, that's the reason I wanted to do this work, is because most of my professional work is on alligators and sea turtles, and I love doing that work, but this is more human focused and can have a direct impact on hopefully the health outcomes for people in Jacksonville. And hopefully it'll make people pay more attention to what's going on around them. And so again, thank you for inviting me to come talk to you all about this, because the more people that know about it, the better.
All right, Professor, thank you very much for that. And I will be following up with you along with our Natural Resources Director, Angela, so we can see how we might be able to collaborate going forward.
Yes, please. I look forward to that.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to make a few announcements here as soon as I can remember how to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. These are just some events that we have coming up, as well as some opportunities for you to get involved as members of the League of Women Voters. And this is going to be Saturday, the 14th. We are actually collaborating with the Florida Justice Center. They're doing a second chance program here at the Mount Sinai Baptist Church. We're going to be there doing voter registration and also volunteering in other ways. There are going to be a number of organizations and agencies from the state as well as from the local community here that'll be working with those people who are justice involved, as well as our members of our community who are immigrants. So if you're interested in volunteering for that, there'll be a sign up email that will go out, but that is going to be on a Saturday at Mount Sinai Baptist Church. We also are going to be participating in the St. Johns County Martin Luther King Day observance this year. Normally our league does participate in the breakfast and the parade here in Jacksonville. This year we're going a little further south. So that's going to take place on Monday, the 16th of January at 10:30 in the morning will be the march. The breakfast did sell out, so a number of us will be at the breakfast, but it's a silent march. It's a reverent march, not a parade or a celebration. It's done in silence. And then we will be participating in that. So it leaves 86 Martin Luther King Avenue at 10:30 in the morning and will proceed to the Plaza de Constitucion, or the slave market, as some of us refer to it, where we'll hear Dr. Gary Williams of Hopewell Church. He's going to be the speaker at the plaza. So we hope that you'll join us for that. Also, we are still in need of people to support our returning citizens. This is at the state level. Not sure if y'all remember, but we sent 1,000 postcards here from our own league out to returning citizens just to ask them to touch base with the league if they were interested in having their voting rights restored and if we could provide some pro bono services. As you can imagine, a number of other leagues did that as well, and they've had a lot of folks respond. So they are in need of members that we can train to volunteer to periodically call and follow up with those returning citizens. If that's something that you're interested in, you can email us at our Gmail address there that you see on the screen. Or you can contact me personally and we'll get you in touch with the State Returning Citizens Committee. Just a reminder, everyone, that in the state of Florida, vote by mail expired at the end of 2022. And if you want to participate in any elections going forward in vote by mail, you will need to actually submit a new vote by mail ballot request. Because we do cover 4 counties and each county is a little different, we encourage you to contact your supervisor of election or go to the SOE's website and see if there is a vote by mail form, an online application, or if you can do it via phone or email. Duval County has a unitary election coming up. Voter registration deadline for that election is going to be February 21st, and the first election takes place March 21st. If you are not certified to do voter registration with our particular league, I would ask that you reach out to Roni DiCamillo or myself. We can make sure that you get in touch with the state's training site so that you can take the mandatory quiz before we send you out to do voter registration with other folks. We get a lot of invitations to go out and provide voter registration in the community. And in order to do that, we do need members who are able to do that, not just on the weekends, but during the week as well. So if that's something of interest to you, we would love to have you join our voter registration committee. On the Duval unitary election ballot will be our mayor, our sheriff, our property appraiser, tax collector, the supervisor of elections, and all 19 city council seats. So if you are a Duval resident, you definitely want to make sure you're registered to vote and that you have a vote by mail on file. We're also asking for our members, especially in Duval County, but all 4, to consider becoming poll workers or election workers. These are not volunteer positions. These are paid. You do have to attend training to be able to serve as a poll worker, but the league is all about free and fair elections. And in order to have free and fair elections, we do need people to man up our polling sites. Duval County went from 199 to 186 precincts, and we need to have people to be able to staff those. So please consider going to the DuvalElections.com website and click on poll workers, and you can submit the online application. Also, we have some committee opportunities here within our local league. Linda Mann is our director of our public education committee. She meets the third Thursday of each month at 5 p.m. via Zoom. The next one will be January 19th. Our healthcare committee is chaired by our director, Wendy Sneed. They meet the first Tuesday of each month at 5 p.m. via Zoom, and their next meeting will be February 7th. And candidate forums, we have been eagerly trying to recruit folks to participate in candidate forums, or excuse me, our candidate forums committee. Hattie Kaufman, our treasurer, and Karen Parrish, our membership director, have both stepped forward to serve as co-chairs of that committee. And we are working on something for the upcoming election here in Duval. If you would like to be part of that, please reach out to them individually or reach out to me so I can put you in touch with them. We would love to have you help. It's a bit of a work, and to do it well really requires a good, strong team. So we hope that you'll join us in that. Also, the education committee is still looking for folks to join and help monitor the Citizen Oversight Committee, local legislation, and state legislation. Susan Ertker has been really monitoring the different school board meetings, and she has a spreadsheet and a sign up. We'd love to put you in touch with her or Linda so that you can help monitor our different school board meetings. A lot going on at school board meetings lately, y'all. Lobby days. For those of you not familiar with this is the opportunity where the State of Florida League actually brings all of our local chapter members together for an opportunity to lobby our elected representatives, meet with each other, with the state chairs, and hear about different things that are taking place within the league and legislation. This year, it's going to be March 7th and 8th in Tallahassee. I'm going to be sending a sign-up email out for anyone who wants to room share or ride share. The rooms can be expensive, and not everyone is comfortable driving to and from Tallahassee, but we don't want that to be a barrier to your attendance. So I'll be sending a sign-up sheet out for that. Also, later on this year, the Florida League of Women Voters will be hosting their state convention that will take place June 1st through the 4th down in Orlando. And again, we're going to offer room sharing as well as ride sharing. So hopefully we can cut down on the cost for our attendees and more people will be able to participate. And lastly, getting ready for legislative session, we would encourage you to start watching the Florida Channel. If you don't already, it's thefloridachannel.org. Also sign up for the League of Women Voters of the State of Florida's Capital Report. This gives you a weekly update of what's going on in Tallahassee with the subcommittee meetings, as well as different pieces of legislation. And you can also, I apologize, we've got to update the year there. You can also go to the Florida flsenate.gov and myfloridahouse.gov, and you can sign up to track bills that have certain titles so that you can see what's going on from one committee to the next. But it's a busy time in the League of Women Voters. I don't know when it's a time where it's not busy, but in order to do the work that we do and to do it well, it really does take the participation and the support of every member we have, whether it's attending your local city council or commissioner meetings, CPAC meetings, following meetings online or in person, writing your legislators, whether it be local representatives or your state or house representative, members of Congress, our senators. We really do have to communicate with them regardless of their political party and regardless of your political party, because once elected, they're our elected representatives, and to assume that they know how you feel or how you think, or for you to assume that they automatically have a certain perspective or a knowledge about a subject might not be correct. So I'm hoping that you'll continue to reach out to your elected representatives, that you'll attend as many opportunities as you can in your local community, and that you'll also participate in league events where they are available to you. And having said that, I'm going to stop the recording. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take those.